Hi, I'm Jarek.
Hi, I'm Lorna.
We're going on a journey to discover the legacy of the American Legion
And how that history of the Legion is shaping the vision for our future. A 100 years of service to community, state, and nation.
That's a lot of American Legion meetings and resolutions, special events and hearings, everything from feeding flood victims to writing the GI Bill and fighting for a stronger VA.
Veterans of every era, active duty personnel, students, teachers, doctors, politicians, and each other.
But how do you tie it all together?
Well, I do know one common thread.
What would that be?
If you stitch it all together, there's a tapestry here. The American Legion was built to make a stronger America. Healthcare for veterans, military preparedness, disaster relief, mentorship of young people, and a better understanding of who we are as a free nation. Put it all together and you have a stronger nation.
I think you're going to have to show me what you mean.
Okay. Did you like history when you were in school?
Actually, I preferred making history. That's why I joined the Army.
Well, you're in the right organization then. The American Legion has been making history for over 100 years, and we're not done yet.
What do you think we're going to discover by looking back at all the accomplishments of the American Legion's past?
I think we'll find the reasons veterans are still serving America. We'll have a better understanding of why we do what we do. Did you know the GI Bill was written by veterans for veterans?
You know, I never really thought about it until it was time for me to actually use it.
Was it at the back of your mind when you enlisted?
Well, I'm sure it was. I mean, free college is a great incentive to serve.
Well, in 1943, it was at the front of the minds of World War I veterans in the American Legion. The GI Bill was written as a response to a crisis. Disabled vets were coming home to virtually no support network, no legitimate chance to restart their lives. They needed help, and the GI Bill was written to provide it. And it certainly did that. But no one could have anticipated all the GI Bill would do to change and strengthen America. All of America, not just veterans.
I never really thought about it like that. I guess it goes back to what you were saying, that the American Legion was built to make America stronger. If you don't treat veterans fairly when they get back from a fight, America doesn't get stronger. And future generations won't be that motivated to serve in the military if they think that veterans are just cannon fodder.
But if you want evidence of American strength, you have to take a look at what all the GI Bill accomplished for everyone, not just veterans. The Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944 touched about everyone's lives. Soon after it passed, people of all classes were able to go to college, start a family, buy a house, and start living what they called the Great American Dream.
I guess it started with a devotion to mutual helpfulness, like it says in the preamble of the Constitution of the American Legion. It's veterans serving veterans.
And veterans strengthening America.
No better example than the GI Bill.
Brought to you by the American Legion.
You know, our post 43 here in Hollywood, California, much like more than 5,000 other posts across this country in communities large and small, was chartered in 1919 by newly discharged World War I veterans, and it's been running strong ever since.
Also, like every new American Legion post that started in the first year, we soon established our own identity based on the local community.
That identity, of course, being Hollywood, is show business.
Ours soon became the American Legion Post to the Stars.
Clark Gable, Humphrey Bogart, Mickey Rooney, Red Buttons, Mary Pickford, and Shirley Temple.
Most of them were veterans like us. Others were just supportive members of the community who appreciated what the American Legion stands for. Veterans, patriotism, strong military, youth and community service.
You know, that's what set the American Legion apart from other veteran service organizations prior to it, is that commitment to the community, a willingness to fulfill needs.
All the way back to the immediate aftermath of the American Revolution, wartime veterans have been creating and operating associations, usually to have a voice in government, which in the earliest years of the Republic was not well equipped, politically willing, or all that interested in assisting those who had been called to arms.
There was Daniel Shays, leader of the so-called Shays Rebellion. Shays, a patriot who enlisted to fight the British for American independence, had been wounded fighting for the Continental Army. When he returned to civilian life, he faced debt and taxes that accrued during his time in the service. Like many Revolutionary War veterans, he stood to lose his land and everything he owned because he served in the military. His situation was shared by many of America's first veterans. So they assembled about 4,000 strong, and Shays led a sometimes violent protest movement to achieve protections against foreclosure and past due payments from the Army.
In the late 18th and early 19th century, veterans discovered that veterans associated together could promote change and fairness in the nation they fought to defend and create.
Some groups were officer only, like the Society of the Cincinnati, whose first president general was George Washington, and they typically looked out for former officers. Ordinary veterans of enlisted soldiers, sailors, and Marines were typically on their own, considered a separate class of veteran. One Revolutionary War veteran, a man named Jeremiah Ryan, was eventually deemed by the government to be unemployable due to what was described as debility of nerves.
Today, we would call his condition post-traumatic stress disorder.
He was awarded $5 a month in disability compensation, 10 years after his honorable discharge. Prior to that, his psychological condition was so severe he could never have applied for relief. And if he disagreed with the government's ruling, he had no right to appeal. Other veterans associations sprang up in the 19th and early 20th century, typically to lobby fair economic and medical relief for those who had been called to war. Often, they were local and state groups. The Grand Army of the Republic, a nationwide association of Civil War Union veterans, assumed broader community responsibilities, but naturally did not admit into its membership their former adversaries, who formed their own organization, United Confederate Veterans. The American Legion borrowed some ideas from the Grand Army of the Republic, local post and state departments, membership eligibility regardless of race or gender, annual encampments that were like national conventions, and the promotion of patriotism in schools and communities. The Grand Army of the Republic and the United Confederate Veterans also brought to their communities and the nation an annual day of remembrance for those who died under arms. They called it Decoration Day, which later became Memorial Day, which the American Legion recognizes in ceremonies worldwide today.
The Legion also learned from the Grand Army of the Republic that partisan politics and veterans advocacy do not work well together in Washington. And when the last GAR member died in 1956, so did the GAR.
These would all be lessons for the American Legion, which was officially established March 15th through 17th in 1919 in Paris, France, by battle-weary troops still in Europe waiting to come home after the end of World War I.
It's not that well known that there was an American Legion even before the Paris Caucus of 1919. American Legion Incorporated. That earlier American Legion, which existed between 1915 and January 1917, was part of the preparedness movement that opposed U.S. neutrality and isolationism during the early years of the Great War in Europe, and began training for the possibility of American involvement. American Legion Incorporated quickly grew to more than 24,000 members nationwide.
American Legion Incorporated turns its membership roster over to the federal government in January of 1917. A little over 3 months later, the United States finally entered the Great War with a stated mission to make the world safe for democracy. Members of American Legion Incorporated and Plattsburgh Camp alumni were quickly recruited as officers and specialists in the American Expeditionary Forces. Among those officers and specialists with American Legion Incorporated and Plattsburgh lineage were Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Roosevelt Jr., son of the nation's 26th president; Colonel William Donovan, future father of U.S. intelligence; Hamilton Fish III, who commanded the famed 369th Infantry Regiment of all African American troops; Lieutenant Colonel Thomas W. Miller, a former congressman from Delaware; Lieutenant Colonel Eric Fisher Wood, an engineer and author who was wounded and gassed while serving as a major with the 88th Infantry Division; Colonel G. Edward Buxton, the commanding officer of the famed Medal of Honor recipient, Sergeant Alvin York.
These Plattsburgh-trained officers would gather after the November 11, 1918 armistice that ended World War I and conceive a new association of veterans, one that would fight for military preparedness, support veterans in need, mentor young people, selflessly serve communities, and advance the ideas of freedom, justice, and democracy. These officers determined that military rank, branch of service, gender, or race would have no bearing on membership in the new association. They determined that it would be completely nonpartisan.
And they decided to call it the American Legion.